Hidden Object Guru here with a look at some games I recently sampled. As always, these are being rated out of 10 based on how interested I am in playing some more of them. Propagation, Paradise Hotel VR. When Propagation VR first came out, I was a huge fan. The bite-sized recreation of the Resident Evil experience as a stationary shooter was so incredibly well executed that I demanded Capcom hire WanaDev Studios to make an official VR Resident Evil experience immediately. Capcom was too stupid to do that, of course, but it doesn't matter, because WanaDev went and did it on their own, creating what might be the definitive VR survival horror experience. Paradise Hotel. The player takes on the role of an employee of a hotel where a virus outbreak has killed all those that it didn't turn into monsters, and they're tasked with finding their sister somewhere within its winding hallways. This is magnificent. It perfectly captures the terror of classic resource-light survival horror, where a couple of bites will doom the player, and there's never enough ammo to go around. Creeping through dimly lit hallways basically forces the player to hold their breath as they wonder which of the many corpses strewn about each area is going to suddenly spring to life and try to tear them apart. The devs made a daring choice that I hadn't seen in the 20 years since the Resident Evil remake, and that's to introduce unkillable zombies. Paradise Hotel zombies are easy enough to put down. 3 headshots will do it, but they won't stay there. The infection rapidly heals all injuries, and after just a couple of idle minutes, they'll be back up and around, once again looking to kill the player. This takes what was already a tense experience, moving around the claustrophobia-inducing hallways in near-pitch darkness, and adds an incredible time pressure. If the player doesn't figure out where to go and what to do fairly quickly, they'll be overwhelmed by the unstoppable dead. It's as stressful and thrilling a VR zombie game as I've ever played, and I'm so excited that I'm able to give it an I beat it out of 10. Now I can't wait to see what WanaDev does next with this amazing VR franchise. 10 out of 10. Cook Serve Forever. This is my first Cook Serve game, and I've got to say, it's pretty addictive. Cooking complicated meals by quickly tapping buttons in the correct order? That's exactly my kind of minigame. I'd worried at first there was going to be a rhythm game like the Senran Kagura cooking competition Bon Appetit. So I was relieved that it was something closer to Simon, asking the player to quickly assess complicated button combos and hit them just right. The fact that this dynamite gameplay is in service of an interesting story about a low-class cook desperate to prove herself by winning a high-profile competition is just icing on the cake. It's fun to dip into for a couple of minutes or to grind out until your fingers get tired. I literally have just one complaint about the game. When Nori, the main character, is cooking, it's represented by one ingredient being added at a time until the dish is complete. So finish one set of buttons, a bun goes down. The next, a burger is placed on it, and so forth. The problem is that the developers have gone to a lot of trouble crafting gorgeous art for each stage of each recipe, and the player never really has a chance to see how good it looks because they've got to be focused on the button prompts at the bottom of the screen. It's a minor drawback to be sure, and it doesn't douse my enthusiasm for the game at all. I just wish they'd found a way to showcase the food assembly better than they do. Still, this thing is magnificent and I can't wait to get back to it. 8 out of 10. Cursed Mansion. I never know what I'm going to get with these RPG Maker-style horror adventures. Sometimes it's bloody horror like Goron Mountain, sometimes it's baffling nonsense like Viviette, and sometimes it's something truly chilling like The Witch's House. Cursed Mansion is very much taking the Witch's House tangent of attempting to create a genuinely eerie experience, and via the excellent setting and beautiful piano work on the soundtrack, it manages to get there. Cursed Mansion effectively builds a location where something horrible lurks around every corner, in which the player has to stumble around in the darkness in the hopes of discovering why this girl has wound up trapped in such a horrible place. I haven't gotten far enough in yet to comment on how effective the plot winds up being, but I don't really care. The vibes are so good that I'm incredibly excited to get the rest of the way through it. Just hope it's not filled with garbage puzzles later on. 7 out of 10. Gunsmith Simulator Prologue. I keep playing these simulators that Playway puts out. I'm never really disappointed, except by Mech Repair Simulator. That was a mess. This thing, on the other hand, really manages to make the gun repair process compelling. Watching the various pieces of the gun come apart and be placed on a blueprint is extremely satisfying, and the minigames for cleaning and oiling parts are just taxing enough to feel worthwhile without demanding the absurd amount of perfection we saw in Dinosaur Fossil Hunter. It was also a smart move to add a shooting element into the game, letting players take their weapons out to the range to make sure they're in full working order after completing the repairs. It's as fiddly as any of these simulators are, but it does a great job of keeping the player on top of their current task, maintaining a list of all of the parts that need to be removed, and even allowing the player to highlight their current objective on the gun at any point. Car and Tank Simulator got into a bunch of trouble by asking the player to keep track of too many parts themselves, a problem that Truck Mechanic Dangerous Paths will hopefully fix before its release as well. So it's great to see Gunsmith Simulator embracing a more user-friendly structure, and I only hope it's a mindset that makes its way to other Playway titles. So yes, I really am excited to see what other guns the full game has in store. 6 out of 10. Unalive 010. Well, that was short. I beat this apparent roguelike shooter in just 40 minutes, on my second attempt through the world. It's kind of a mess. The controls are pretty basic. Use the right thumbstick and bumper to aim and shoot, with the left bumper handling dodging duties. There's fundamental flaws in the gameplay. The 3D enemies viewed from a high angle are difficult to precisely aim at, and the camera is so close that they have a nasty habit of shooting at the player from off-screen. Each new room has a perk in it, but there's no stats screen to allow you to get a sense of how your character is improving based on acquiring them. The game's tutorial told me that every time I killed a boss, my starting chamber would be moved to that location so that I could spend the resources I'd be gathering on leveling up my character and improving the stats on the drone that shows up every now and then. Only that didn't happen. I killed the first boss, a giant tentacle that spawns other enemies. Actually, all the bosses do that, but that's not the point. I killed it, and just continued moving forward for a few more screens until I died. But then, when I continued, I was back at the start of the game, and all of my resources had been removed, so I wasn't able to upgrade anything. The only sign I'd played the game before was an appearance of a piece of the tentacle monster in my trophy case. I was frustrated, but played a second run just to see if there was something I'd missed. Maybe the transported lab was off a different branch than I'd taken? I never did find that lab again, but I did beat the whole game, which puts me in a bit of a pickle since I scored these reviews based on my excitement at the prospect of playing more of the games I sample, and games I play all the way through get a 10 out of 10. But seriously, I don't want you to play this game unless they fix what's wrong with it and add a ton more content. Still, it gets an I beat it out of 10 with an asterisk. Handless Show. Timing and coordination-based minigames that end with hands being severed if the player screws up? I didn't know that this was a genre I was obsessed with, but suddenly here we are. The structure, that this is a bizarre sadistic game show complete with audience that cheers success hard and failure even harder, is a great entry into the world. And the cartoony graphics are an inspiration, recalling my beloved Suicide Guy, where everything is just floopy and colorful enough that it's impossible to find the violence too upsetting. The publishers were kind enough to send me the game on both Quest 2 and Steam, so I was able to compare the versions. Overall, they're almost completely identical, with the Vive version edging out the Quest slightly. There's a small amount of jitteriness inherent in the inside-out tracking that the Quest 2 offers, and it makes mini-games that require perfect precision, such as moving a hoop over a line or guiding a ball through a maze, something of a chore on the Quest. Then there's the turn the handles so they fit through the holes minigame, which is just a disaster on either platform. I don't know what causes it, but every now and then the hands will just go completely wonky when I'm trying to hold them still. I'll be looking at the hand on screen and I'll think to myself, hey, I'm pretty sure that I'm not rotating my wrist 720 degrees. But the game doesn't concur, and I end up losing a hand out of it. Still, the game is easy to jump into and play for a couple of minutes, it's super addictive, and I've already played it for like 10 hours without beating it, so I don't see myself stopping anytime soon. Please though, developers, take out the rotate hands to fit through gaps minigame until the physics of it have been fixed. That way I might actually beat the thing one day. Until then, this is an easy 9 out of 10. Cursed Pantsu. This mall set action RPG tries to capture Souls-like combat, but doesn't quite get there. After stealing a pair of panties from a store, Kaori finds herself trapped in a cursed mall-themed dreamland, possibly by her own guilt, and possibly by the creepy pervert who watches her through the security cameras. I haven't beaten the game, so I can't definitively say what's going on in the story. A few design quirks keep it from feeling fully satisfying to play. While the enemies get staggered a little by attacks, they just kind of freeze rather than visibly moving from the impact, which makes combat seem pretty weightless. The platform can be especially frustrating, as nearly every fall results in instant death, and the game isn't super great about communicating where your last checkpoint was. I'm pretty sure that it's the last time you talk to your friend, since doing so also heals you, but a little confirmation by the game that a checkpoint has been established would be a nice touch. Pro tip. Buy jump kick immediately, as doing that move increases your jump distance by like 33%. The game has an interesting enough setting, and I'm curious to see where the story goes, but the admin of the mall, with his focus on sexually humiliating the heroine, is such a loathsome character that it makes me less interested in continuing a story that will force me to spend more time around him. It's hard to tell whether the game is using a villainous character to justify fan service in an exploitative way, or if the worldview of the game is legitimately misogynistic. Guess I'll have to play the whole thing to figure that out, although there's only about a 60% chance of that happening. 6 out of 10. Hippo Little Red Riding Hood. So, yeah, this is a game for children. I recognize that. I'm going to attempt to say whether it's good at doing what it does, but it's going to get a little rough because I'm not a 5-year-old, which is its target audience. Basically, this is a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood featuring a hippo. Given the amount of gameplay that involves moving a cursor around the screen, I think it's fair to say that this experience was originally built for touchscreens that children can tap on. Maybe you can even tap on the Switch version? I don't know. I played with a controller. The plot, which involves a jealous dragon desperate to recover the bandana that proves his skill as a dancer, is cute enough. And the minigames are decent tests of item identification and simple math skills. I will say that it's extremely short, with the main story only lasting around 10 minutes if the player gets through all of the minigames on their first try. Wrapping up the story unlocks virtual coloring and sticker books, so that's a decent amount of bonus content for the kids. One note though, the story doesn't have any subtitles that I can find, and while it's fairly clear what's going on narratively, specific instructions on how to play the levels are given via the game's audio, so not having text to go with it is pretty inexcusable. 4 out of 10. Naked Hero. Only a game in the most literal sense of the word. Naked Hero is an absolute mess. This isn't a surprise, of course, as the developer, Taro Lanka, is known primarily for making games that only kind of work. While I was charmed by the seemingly completely random enemy types, cyber dwarves, elites from Halo, and the deadliest of them all, forest pixies, the combat is so awful that it drove me from the game almost immediately. Souls-like combat simply doesn't work without a lock-on button, and the game's movement is so broken that the hero can only dodge straight ahead. Also, she has a block button that does nothing. And it's worth pointing out, the level geometry is oddly placed and missized for the characters. I'm not saying that my beloved Gangsta Sniper was a prize or anything, but at least it offered a baseline functionality that this game can't even approach. 1 out of 10. I've been the Hidden Object Guru, thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more, remember to like and subscribe. If you'd like to see a 7 out of 10 game that I would wholeheartedly recommend, check out my game Dracula Defense, as it's kind of a blast. And if you have any recommendations for other games for me to check out, be sure to drop them in the comments section below the video. We'll see you back here when I've had a chance to play some more games, but until then I'll say that's right, au revoir.